In the dim corridors of forgotten history, there lies a custom whispered about in hushed tones. A ritual both sacred and profane, known by many names yet remembered by few. The living, in their desperate attempt to appease the restless dead, would bind the hands of the living daughter to the memory of a man who had already crossed the threshold into the grave. They called it a ghost marriage. To some it was protection, to others it was madness. But for those who lived it, it was a fate as heavy as stone, a contract signed not with ink, but with blood and silence. The story begins in a village swallowed by mist, its houses pressed tightly together like mourners at a funeral. At the heart of this place lived a family whose wealth was measured not in gold, but in the fragility of their only daughter. May, she was 17, a girl whose laughter had once sounded like the chime of silver bells. But in those years laughter was forbidden, for death had entered their household. Her betrothed, the young son of a neighboring clan, perished, suddenly fever burning his body until only a shell remained. Yet promises made by families were stronger than the grave. The marriage contract, already signed, did not dissolve with his death. The elders declared that the union must still take place. To abandon it, they warned, would call forth the wrath of the departed. His spirit will wander, unsatisfied, until he drags others down with him. And so, in the name of peace, May's father agreed. On the night chosen by the stars, the girl was dressed not in the crimson of a bride, but in garments dyed the deep, mournful red of blood. Lanterns lined the narrow street, their flames flickering like watchful eyes. May felt each step as though she walked deeper into a cavern where no echo could return. The villagers watched in silence, for to speak would risk calling attention from things unseen. At the threshold of the dead boy's family home, a table was set. Upon it lay a tablet inscribed with his name, draped in funeral cloth. That tablet was now her husband. That absence, that void, was what she was bound to. The ritual was precise. She bowed 3 times before the tablet, her forehead striking the wooden floor until it throbbed with pain. Incense smoke curled upward like the sighs of the forgotten. Cups of rice wine were raised, one for her, one placed before the tablet. When the wine touched her lips, May felt the bitterness spread not only across her tongue, but down into her very marrow. The final act was the bedding ritual. They led her to a chamber where a straw mat had been laid. The bed was empty, yet not empty. Beside her, the space where a living groom should have been was filled only by shadows. Tradition demanded she lie down, eyes closed, as though waiting for a touch that would never come. And yet, as the night deepened, she swore she felt a chill hand graze her arm. Whether it was the weight of her own terror or the presence of something else, she could not tell. By dawn, May was no longer the girl who had walked into that house. She was now a wife to the dead, chained to a silence that could never be broken. From that day forward, her life belonged not to herself, but to a shadow, a memory, a grave that would never yield. The villagers whispered that she had saved them, that the boy's spirit was calmed. But May knew that her own spirit had been offered in exchange. This was not a tale of one girl alone. In those centuries, countless others were led into ghost marriages. Some were offered to men who had died violently, so their souls might rest. Others were paired with women who had perished before bearing children, so a lineage might be completed in the eyes of tradition. To outsiders it may sound like cruelty, but to those within, it was survival. To refuse was to invite misfortune, to risk famine, disease, or the anger of wandering ghosts. Thus, the practice endured, hidden in plain sight, like bloodstains beneath a polished floor. A ceremony of shadows where the living became prisoners of the dead, and love was nothing more than an illusion carved upon wood. The nights that followed her wedding were heavy with silence, a silence so deep it seemed to hum beneath the floorboards. May's new chamber was a place of shadows, its walls draped with faded cloth and funeral talismans. At the center stood the wooden tablet bearing her husband's name, its carved letters watching her as if they were eyes. Each morning, she was to bow before it, light incense, and pour tea into a cup no hand would ever lift. It was ritual, repetition, and yet within it, May felt the steady unraveling of herself. At first, she told herself it was only her imagination. The rustle at night, as though robes dragged across the floor. The faint pressure at her side, as if someone lay down beside her in the straw bed. But then came the dreams. In them, she saw the boy as he had been, in life his skin pale, lips cracked with fever, eyes burning with an unquenched hunger. He reached for her, whispering words she could not hear, though she felt them ripple through her bones. When she woke, her skin was cold, damp with sweat, and the faint scent of incense lingered in her hair, though no stick had been lit. Her parents visited often, assuring her she was doing what was right. "His spirit is calmer now," her father said, with a tremor that betrayed both fear and relief. "Already the omens are fading. No more broken mirrors, no more howls in the night. You have brought peace to us all." May listened but did not answer. How could she tell them that the peace they spoke of was purchased with her own torment? That she felt her life being siphoned away, drop by drop, each time she closed her eyes. The villagers treated her with reverence. They left offerings at her door, whispered blessings as she passed. Some even envied her, for to be chosen as a bride to the dead was seen as an honor, a sacrifice that lifted an entire community. But May knew better. She carried the weight of that honor in her chest like a stone, pressing down until each breath was a struggle. One evening, as the moon bled pale light across the floor, May sat alone before the tablet. Her hands trembled as she poured the wine into 2 cups. One for her, one for him. She raised her cup to her lips, but the other, untouched, unmoved, began to empty. Slowly, impossibly, the liquid within receded, as though absorbed by invisible lips. May's heart froze. Her hand jerked, spilling wine across the mat. The air grew colder, so cold her breath rose like smoke. And then she heard it. A sigh, long and low, curling through the chamber like wind through a tomb. From that night, there was no denying it. The boy she had been bound to was still there, lingering at the threshold of life and death. Sometimes she felt him behind her, a presence that made the hairs on her neck rise. Sometimes she caught the shadow of a figure moving where no figure should be. Once, when she awoke in the dead of night, she found her own hair braided neatly, though she had gone to sleep with it loose. The touch was tender, almost loving him, yet it filled her with dread. For what kind of love could belong to a man no longer flesh? Her mind began to split, torn between fear and a strange, reluctant pity. He had not asked for this fate either. It died young, with dreams unfinished, chained to the earth by promises that should have dissolved with his body. Was he any less a prisoner than she? Sometimes she imagined his grief, his longing, the endless silence of his grave, broken only by the echo of her breath. In those moments, she felt the faintest trace of compassion. And then, the touch would return, cold as iron, and her compassion would wither into terror. May confided in no one. To speak of it would bring shame, disbelief, perhaps worse. Instead, she carried her burden in silence, her once bright eyes now clouded, her laughter sealed away. She was 17, but she moved with the heaviness of age, her back bent as though under unseen weight. Each day she performed her duties, each night she endured the haunting. All the while a single question gnawed at her. How long could a marriage to the dead truly last? Was she bound until her own death? Or had she already stepped into the grave with him, her body walking but her spirit already buried? The elders spoke of balance, that when the living and the dead are joined, harmony is restored. But May could feel no harmony. Only the echo of a vow that had become a chain, binding her to a love that was neither love nor hate, but something darker. A bond forged not in desire but in fear. And as the days lengthened into weeks, she began to realize that the true curse of the ghost marriage was not the presence of her phantom husband, but the slow erasure of herself. As the seasons shifted, the world outside May's chamber seemed to move on, yet inside she lived in a time that was neither day nor night. She tended to the rituals as commanded, but with each passing week, the line between what was real and what belonged to the realm of shadows grew thinner. Sometimes she would step outside, her feet bare upon the dirt, and hear her name whispered from behind her, though no one was there. Sometimes she would reach for a bowl of rice, only to find another hand-cold, translucent reaching for it at the same moment. The villagers, once grateful, began to notice unsettling signs. Animals grew restless near her house, their eyes rolling white, refusing to cross her path. Infants woke screaming in the night, their mothers claiming a pale figure lingered at the window. At first, they blamed the wind, the winter, their own superstitions. But when crops began to fail in the fields closest to May's home, unease spread like a contagion. The whispers that had once called her savior now shifted into murmurs of curse. Within May, the conflict deepened. She found herself speaking to the tablet as though it might answer. Sometimes she swore it did not, with words, but with the faint quiver of incensed smoke, curling into shapes that resembled a face she half remembered. She longed to escape, to run from the suffocating silence, but each time her courage gathered, something intervened. One evening, she attempted to leave her chamber, only to find the door would not open. No matter how she pushed, no matter how she screamed, the wood remained solid as stone. When at last it gave way at dawn, her hands were raw and bloodied, and on the floor before her lay strands of hair not her own. It was then that the visions began. By day, she saw the boy as he had been before death, smiling faintly, his hand outstretched, his eyes gentle. By night, she saw the truth of his corpse skin blotched with sickness, lips blackened, teeth bared in eternal hunger. The two forms shifted without warning, and May never knew which husband she would meet. At times, pity softened her heart. At others, terror drove her to clutch her own arms until bruises blossomed, just to remind herself she was still alive. The breaking point came on the night of the festival when the village gathered to honor ancestors. Lanterns were lit and floated into the sky, carrying prayers for the dead. May, cloaked in red, stood at the edge of the crowd. As the lanterns rose, she felt a hand seize hers. It was cold, impossibly cold, and yet firm. She turned, expecting an elder, but no one stood beside her. The villagers gasped, for from their view her arm was lifted, held by something invisible, as though she were dancing with air. Children screamed. Old women wailed. In that moment, all doubt dissolved. May was not alone. The elders convened, their faces drawn with fear. They argued through the night. Some claimed she must remain with him until her death, that to break the bond would condemn them all. Others whispered of exorcisms, of burying her alive to trap the spirit once more. May, crouched outside the chamber where they spoke, heard every word. Her heart pounded not only with terror, but with fury. Had her sacrifice not been enough? Must her body to be offered, swallowed by soil, just to sat their fear? That night she returned to her chamber, her thoughts a storm. The tablet loomed before her, silent as ever. She struck it with her hand, splintering wood, shouting into the darkness. "What do you want from me? Am I not already yours?" The room shuddered, lantern flames guttering out one by one. And then, in the hollow dark, she heard it clearly for the first time, his voice whispering her name. Not in anger, not in demand, but in longing, endless and unbearable. She sank to her knees, tears burning her eyes. For the first time, she understood that she was not bound to a monster, but to a grief so deep it could not die. He wanted her presence, not for vengeance, but for comfort, to soothe the loneliness of death. And yet, to give herself fully meant erasing what remained of her soul. May was caught in a vice, torn between compassion for a boy whose life had ended too soon and terror of becoming a shadow herself. From that night on, the villagers avoided her completely. Doors shut when she passed. Whispers coiled behind her. Yet the fear in their eyes told her they no longer saw May at all. They saw only the bride of a ghost, half in this world, half in the next. Her reflection in the water confirmed that her face was paler, her eyes darker, as though something within her was being claimed. She wondered how much time she had left before she too was a memory carved into wood. The final winter came with an unrelenting chill. Snow pressed against the rooftops of the village, muffling every sound, as though the earth itself wished to forget what lingered there. May had grown thin, her face one like parchment, her voice scarcely more than a breath. Yet in her eyes flickered something not wholly human, a reflection of that other world to which she was tethered. The villagers crossed themselves when she passed, and even her parents avoided her gaze. She had become a living omen, a reminder that the barrier between the living and the dead was thinner than they dared admit. One evening, as the wind howled like wolves, the elders came once more to her door. Their decision was final. The bond must be severed. They spoke of cleansing rites, of burning the tablet, of releasing the boy's spirit into the void. But beneath their words may hurt another truth. They feared her more than they feared him. In their eyes, she was no longer a girl, but the vessel of something unnatural, something that threatened their fragile order. They sought not salvation, but her erasure. That night, left alone in her chamber, May sat before the tablet one last time. The wood was cracked where she had struck it, yet it still bore his name. She lit the final stick of incense, the smoke curling upward like a stairway into darkness. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady as she whispered, "They want me to cast you away. They want me to forget." For a moment, silence stretched like the pause between heartbeats. Then the air grew colder, the shadows deepened, and the whisper came again. Her name spoken with such longing it pierced her like a blade. She closed her eyes, and in that instant she felt his presence envelop her not with the chill of the grave, but with the aching warmth of a love that had never lived long enough to blossom. In her mind, she saw his face as it might have been, had fever not stolen him. She saw herself walking beside him in fields of spring, their laughter rising like birds into the sky. It was a dream, a phantom, but it filled her chest with a sweetness so painful it broke her. The next morning, the villagers awoke to silence. Her chamber door was wide open, snow drifting across the threshold. Inside, they found the tablet split in two, incense ash scattered like black petals. The bed was empty. May was gone. Some swore she had fled into the mountains, unable to endure the curse. Others whispered she had been claimed at last, taken into the arms of her ghostly husband, her body dissolving into mist. In the years that followed, travelers spoke of seeing a pale figure wandering the hills at dusk, her hand held out as though clasping another's, invisible to all but her. The village did not recover. Crops failed, children sickened, the river turned silted and foul. Some said it was punishment for trying to sever a bond that should never have been broken. Others believed May's restless spirit lingered, neither living nor dead, searching for peace that would never come. Whatever the truth, her name was struck from records, her story buried beneath layers of silence. Yet silence cannot erase memory. The tale endured, whispered from grandmother to child, a warning carried through generations. Be wary of promises that outlive the flesh. And so the legend of the ghost bride lived on, drifting between history and nightmare. Was May a victim, sacrificed to appease the fears of her people? Or did she find in death the love denied to her in life? No one can say. That remains is the echo of her footsteps, the chill of her presence when the wind moves through the fields, and the uneasy certainty that the boundary between the living and the dead is not a wall, but a door end sometimes. When grief is strong enough, that door will not stay shut. Even now, in certain villages, offerings are left at crossroads, bowls of rice, cups of wine, a length of red silk, not for the ancestors, not for the gods, but for the bride who walked away from her life, hand in hand with a shadow. They say that if you listen closely on winter nights, when the air itself seems to hold its breath, you will hear her name whispered just behind your ear. A name carried not by wind, but by lips that should have turned to dust centuries ago. And in that moment, you will understand. Some marriages are never broken. Not by death, not by time, not even by the silence of the grave.